There's a sound a stagecoach door makes when it shuts on a person who needed to be inside it. Not a slam. Worse than a slam. A quiet, final little click. The sound of someone deciding your hope isn't worth the inconvenience. I heard that sound on a Tuesday in front of the Calder's Crossing Relay office, and I've spent the better part of my life trying to forget the face of the woman it shut out. She didn't scream. She didn't beg. That's the part that ruined me. She just stood there in the dust with everything she owned in a flour sack and a tin trunk, watching the only thing standing between her and a future roll away without her. I had a horse, a half-broke wagon, and 3 good reasons to mind my own business. I'm going to tell you which one I threw away, and what it cost both of us before the week was out. This is the story of a closed door, an open road, and a debt that got paid back from the strangest direction a man can be saved from. Stay with me to the end. The last mile is the one you'll remember. The Birchfield stage pulled out of Calder's Crossing at 9 in the morning, with the wrong number of passengers aboard. I knew it was the wrong number because I'd been leaning against the corral rail for the better part of an hour, doing the thing I do when I'm waiting on a horse buyer who's running late, counting. I count. It's a habit my mother would have called a vice and a preacher would have called a sin of pride, but I keep a little ledger in my coat pocket, and in it I tally what's owed and what's owing. Debts, favors, 2 bits here, a night's lodging there. I like the world to balance. It almost never does, but I like it too, and the counting is how I make my peace with the difference. So I counted. 6 passengers stepped up into that coach, 6 fares, and 1 woman who'd been first in line at dawn got left standing on the boards. Let me tell you how it happened, because I watched the whole ugly arithmetic of it. She'd come up the road before the rooster had finished its business, a slim woman in a brown traveling dress that had been good cloth once and had since been turned, mended, and turned again. She carried a tin trunk that she set down and picked up and set down again like she couldn't decide whether putting it on the ground was a sign of weakness. Over her shoulder, a flour sack with the top knotted. She'd paid her fare. I saw the agent take her coin and make a mark in his book, and she'd stood there in the cold getting paler by the minute, the way a person does when they're holding still on purpose so as not to fall down. Then at 9:15, the gentleman arrived. You know the type. I put money on it. Broadcloth coat, watch chain the weight of a horse's bit, a valise of tooled leather, and the particular slow blink of a man who has never once in his life heard the word no without it being followed immediately by an apology. He came up to the agent and spoke low, and money changed hands, more money than a fare, I'd guess, by the way the agent's eyes went down and stayed down. The driver, a leathery old article named Prout, whom I'd known for years to be neither cruel nor kind but simply tired, came around and did the counting for me. He looked at the gentleman. He looked at the coach. He looked at the woman. And then he did the thing. He took her trunk down off the boot where it had already been loaded, set it on the boards with a thump that I felt in my back teeth, and he said, I was close enough to hear it, close enough to wish I hadn't been, no room, ma'am. We're full up. Office'll refund your fare next coach. Next coach was Thursday. I watched her face do something I've only seen a few times in my life. It didn't crumple. That's what I expected, what I think Prout expected, what would have been easiest for everyone. Instead, it went very still and very controlled, like a frozen pond with something moving fast underneath the ice. She said, in a voice that didn't shake even though it had every right to, I was here first. You took my fare. And you'll get it back, Prout said, not unkindly, which somehow made it worse. He was already climbing up. The gentleman in the broadcloth coat settled himself into her seat. I'll give him this. He had the decency to look out the other window. He didn't watch. Cowards never do. She stepped up, put her hand on the door, said something I couldn't hear, low and quick, the only fast words she'd let herself use that whole morning. And Prout, God forgive him, God forgive all of us standing around watching, reached down and pulled the door shut. Clicking. That sound. The team leaned into the traces. the coach groaned. The wheels broke loose from the morning mud with a sucking pop, and the whole rig rolled out past the smithy and down the south road and was gone behind the cottonwoods inside of a minute. She stood watching it the entire time, until the dust settled. Longer than that. She stood watching the empty place where her future had been like she could call it back by force of wanting. Then she bent down, picked up her trunk, and looked around for somewhere to put it. And there wasn't anywhere. That's the thing about a town like Calder's Crossing. It's a place you pass through, not a place that has a bench for the ones it leaves behind. Now, I want to be honest with you, because if I'm not honest at the start of this, then nothing I tell you later will be worth your time. I had 3 good reasons to walk away. The first was a horse buyer named Dahlin who was due any hour, who owed me on a string of 4 geldings I needed to sell to make my note at the bank, and who would not wait around if I wasn't there to meet him. The second was that I am not, as a rule, a man who inserts himself. My wife used to say I'd let a house burn down rather than knock on a stranger's door to mention the smoke. She said it as a joke. She wasn't entirely joking. I learned early that getting involved in other people's troubles is the surest way to inherit them, and I had a full helping of my own. The third reason was the biggest, and it's the one I'm ashamed of. The third reason was that 2 years back I had stood at the side of a road much like this one, and watched a wagon I should have been driving roll out without me, and what came back down that road 3 days later was a thing I have never told anyone about and don't intend to start now. Suffice to say, the last time I tried to help a woman make a journey, I buried her at the end of it. So when I tell you I had a reason to look away from this one, believe me, I had earned that reason in the hardest currency there is. I looked away. I made it about 4 steps toward the corral. Then she said, not to me, not to anyone, just out loud to the morning because she'd run clean out of people to say it to, I have until Friday. I stopped. I want to tell you I turned around out of pure Christian charity. The truth is I turned around because of the ledger in my pocket and the way my whole life is organized around the idea that accounts ought to balance, and what I had just watched was the most unbalanced thing I'd seen in 2 years. A woman pays. The world takes her money. The world gives her nothing. A man who has never wanted for anything takes the seat she paid for, and everybody just lets it. That's not how it's supposed to go. So I turned around. Ma'am, I said, what's on Friday? She looked at me the way you'd look at a coyote that had wandered up to your fire and asked the time. Careful, recalculating. I don't blame her. A strange man approaching a stranded woman is not, in the general run of things, the answer to her prayers, and she had no way of knowing I wasn't the next variety of trouble. That's my affair, she said. Fair, I said, I'll go, and I meant it. I'd given her the chance, she declined it, the account was, to my way of thinking, square. I touched my hat and turned again. Wait. I waited. She studied me a moment longer. Then she seemed to make a decision the way a person crosses a stream they're not sure they can cross all at once, no halfway. There's a land office in Ardmore Wells, she said, 60 miles south. My husband filed a homestead claim on a quarter section 2 years ago. He had 3 years to prove it up, to live on it, work it, make it ours for good. He died 14 months in. A small pause, the kind where a person walks fast past a hole in the ground. I can finish proving it. The law lets a widow finish, but I have to be standing in front of the registrar in Ardmore Wells to file the final affidavit before the office closes Friday, or the claim lapses, and the land goes back to the territory, and somebody else files on it Monday morning. And I have reason to think somebody is already waiting too. The fella in the broadcloth coat, I said. I don't know why I said it. It just clicked into place the way the door had clicked shut. Something flickered across her face. His name is Harlan Voss, she said quietly. He owns the spread that borders ours on 3 sides. He has offered to buy me out 4 times. The last time he stopped offering and started explaining what would happen if I didn't sell. And this morning he paid Prout to put me off that coach. I can't prove it, but I know it the way you know your own name. 60 miles, 4 days. No horse, no wagon, and a man with money and a head start riding the only stage south till Thursday. I did the arithmetic. It came out bad. It came out very bad. I'm going to tell you exactly what went through my mind in the next 10 seconds, because it's the truest thing in this whole story. I thought Dalin's coming. You'll miss the sale, you'll miss the note. I thought, you don't know this woman. Voss is rich and rich men remember faces. This is the kind of trouble you inherit and never put down. And then I thought about a road 2 years gone, and a wagon and the click of a door, and I thought, and I am not proud of how childish it was, but it's the truth. I'm so tired of letting them roll away. I've got a wagon, I said. It's a rough rig and a rougher road, and I won't pretend it's comfortable. But the South Fork cuts off near 20 miles versus the stage road, and if the weather holds and the river's down, I can have you standing in front of that registrar by Thursday night. She didn't leap at it. I respected her for that. She looked at the wagon, looked at me, looked at the empty road where Voss had disappeared, and she did the arithmetic too. Stranger versus certainty. A bad bet versus no bet at all. I can't pay you, she said. Voss saw to that years ago. Everything I have is in that trunk, and most of it's seed corn and my husband's tools. Did I ask you to pay me? Men generally have a price. She said it flat, not cruel, just a fact she'd learned and didn't enjoy knowing. I'm sure I do, I said. But it's not the one you're bracing for. Get in or don't, ma'am. The road won't get any shorter while we discuss my character. For 1 second, the ice cracked, and something young and frightened and desperately hopeful looked out at me. Then she packed it away, picked up her trunk before I could reach for it, and said, Marin. My name is Marin Tate, and if you cross me, Mr. Brennan, Tom Brennan. Mr. Brennan, you'll find I'm harder to put off than a stagecoach. I believed her. Lord help me, I believed her right down to the ground. I left Dalin a note nailed to the corral post. It said the geldings were his at the agreed price if he'd leave the money with the bank and take them, and that I'd settle accounts when I got back. It was a foolish, trusting thing to do, and it might have cost me everything I owned, and I did it anyway. And as I climbed up onto that wagon seat next to a woman I'd known for 11 minutes, I felt something I hadn't felt since the day I dug a grave by myself in the rain. I felt, for the first time in 2 years, like I was driving towards something instead of away. We made 11 miles before noon. The day was bright and hard, the kind of high plains light that makes everything look closer than it is. Marin sat with her spine straight and her hands folded over the flour sack in her lap, and she didn't talk, and I didn't make her. I'm not a talker by nature. But I noticed things, I always notice things, and what I noticed was this. Every so often, when the wagon hit a rut and she thought I wasn't looking, she'd press one hand flat against the tin trunk wedged behind the seat. Just touch it, like checking a heartbeat. Around the second hour I couldn't stand it. Seed corn, I said. You said most of it's seed corn. It's the strain my husband bred, she said. 8 years of it. He kept back the best ears every season, drought hard, early sweet. There's not another sack of it in the territory. If I prove up the claim, I plant it. If I don't, she stopped. It's not just land, Mr. Brennan. It's everything he made with his hands that's still alive. The man himself is under 6 feet of it. But the corn, she pressed her hand to the trunk again. The corn I can keep going. I thought about that for a long mile. About a man dead in the ground he loved, and the only piece of him still growing being kept alive in a tin trunk by a woman who'd been put off a coach like a parcel nobody wanted. About how the world had decided that didn't matter, and a fat man's convenience did. The ledger in my pocket felt heavier than it had any right to. We'll get you there, I said. She didn't answer, but after a while, when we hit the next bad rut, I noticed she didn't reach back to touch the trunk. She just glanced at me instead, as if she'd transferred a small portion of her checking the heartbeat over to a different account. I'd like to tell you, the road was kind to us after that. It wasn't. By the time the light went gold and long, I could smell the change coming, that wet copper smell that means weather, and not the friendly kind. To the southwest, where we were headed, the sky had gone the color of an old bruise, and the cottonwoods along the dry wash were starting to show the pale undersides of their leaves, which any plains man will tell you is the land's own way of flinching before it's hit. Marin saw me reading the sky. Storm. Storm, I agreed. And our cutoff crosses the Pawnee Fork about 4 miles on. River's nothing most of the year, but a hard rain upcountry, and it comes down that bed like the devil collecting a debt. I clucked the team up. If we beat the water, we cut 20 miles and you're early. If we don't, then we go around, the long way, the stage road. The long way puts us into Ardmore Wells Friday afternoon at the soonest, if the office closes at noon. She understood. I watched her understand it, the whole bitter shape of it, that the very shortcut that could save her depended on us reaching it before the storm turned it into a wall. "How far to the crossing?" she asked. "Hour, maybe less if the team holds." She looked at the bruised sky. She looked at the trunk. And then Marin Tate, who had been put off a coach that morning without raising her voice, leaned forward on the seat, took up the second set of lines I kept looped on the brake handle, and said in a voice gone hard and clear as creek ice, "I want to be plain about that, because the way these things usually get told, the hero whips up the team and they thunder across just as the flood comes roaring down behind them and everybody laughs about it later over coffee. That's not what happened. What happened is that we came over the last rise above the Pawnee Fork in the last gray light, and where there should have been a 40-foot ribbon of mud you could walk a child across, there was instead a churning brown monster of a river, 60 feet bank to bank, hauling whole uprooted trees along in it like a man clearing his table with his forearm. The rain hadn't even reached us yet. That was the cruelty of it. The water came from a storm 40 miles up the watershed that we couldn't see and hadn't felt a drop of. The sky over our heads was bruised but dry, and the river was impassable. I hauled the team up. The geldings didn't need much hauling. They'd smelled it before I'd seen it, and they did not care for it one bit. For a long moment neither of us said anything. The river said plenty. It roared and sucked, and every few seconds something heavy would tumble through and crack against the rocks with a sound like a rifle. "How long?" Marin said. "Until it goes down." "Day, maybe 2. Friday's the day after tomorrow." "I know it." She was quiet. I watched her do the arithmetic she'd been doing all day, and I watched it come out the same way mine had bad, and I watched her refuse to accept the answer the way she'd refused all the other bad answers since dawn. "There's a ford," I said slowly. I hadn't wanted to say it. "Old Freighter's Crossing, 3 miles up. The bed's wider there, the water spreads out and runs shallower. In weather like this it'd still be bad, but it might be crossable bad instead of drown you dead bad. I won't lie to you that it's safe. There's a difference between hard and stupid, and I've spent 2 years learning to tell them apart, and this is right on the line. Take me to the ford." "Marin." "Mr. Brennan." She turned on the seat and looked at me full on, the way she hadn't all day. The control was still there, but I could see now what it cost her to keep it. I have watched the world close one door after another in my face for 2 years. The bank, the lawyer, Voss, my own neighbors who were too afraid of Voss to sign as witnesses to my husband's improvements. That coach this morning. I am so tired of standing on the wrong side of doors. Her voice didn't break. It bent like green wood and held. "If there is a crossing, I want to try it. If it's a fool's chance, then I'll be a fool. But I will not sit on this bank and let the water decide what a registrar's clock already decided I get to keep." I have thought about that little speech a great many times in the years since. I've decided it was the most sensible, insane thing anyone ever said to me. We went to the ford. The light was nearly gone by the time we found it, and now the rain did reach us, not a downpour, just a cold, steady spit that found the back of the neck and stayed there. The Freighter's Crossing was wider, like I'd said. The water spread out over a gravel bar maybe 100 feet across, and where the channel narrowed there was a run of fast, deep water perhaps 30 feet wide, the color of coffee with cream and moving fast enough to make me sick to look at. "I'll lead the team across on foot," I said. "Keep their heads up, keep them moving, don't let them stop in the deep part, a horse'll panic and tangle if it stops. You stay on the seat, hold the trunk, and if the wagon goes over you let go of everything and you grab the upstream side and you do not try to save the trunk. You hear me? The seed corn is not worth your life." "The seed corn," she said, "is the only thing that makes my life worth the trouble." "Then we won't tip the wagon," I said. "Hold on. I'd like to walk you through every foot of that crossing, but the honest truth is most of it's a blur of cold and noise, and the particular full-body fear of a man up to his chest, in moving water with 4 panicking 1,000-pound animals at the end of his arm. I remember the gravel rolling under my boots. I remember the off-lead gelding, a good-hearted brute I'd named Pilgrim, lunging when the water hit his belly, and me hauling his head around and shouting something into his ear that wasn't words. I remember the deep channel, the cold of it like being struck, the water suddenly chest-high and then chin-high, the team swimming, the wagon floating and yawing and the whole rig wanting to swing downstream and turn over. And I remember the moment it almost did. The current caught the upstream wheels and lifted them. I felt it through the lines, felt the whole wagon start to come up onto 2 wheels, that sick hanging instant before it rolls. I couldn't help it. I had both hands full of swimming horse. If that wagon went over in the channel, the team would be dragged down with it, and so would Marin. I heard her cry out, not a scream, a sharp bark of effort, and I risked one look back. She had thrown herself across the seat to the upstream side, flung her whole body weight against the tilt, and she was hanging half off the wagon with her boot heels hooked under the seat board, and her arms wrapped around the upstream rail, and her face turned up into the rain, and by God she was holding it. 120-pound woman against a tipping wagon in a flood. It shouldn't have been enough. The arithmetic says it shouldn't have been enough. But the wheels came down. Whether it was her weight or Pilgrim finding the bar with his hooves or just dumb mercy, the wheels came down, and the wagon settled, and we lurched up out of the channel onto the rising gravel of the far bank in a clatter of hooves, and a great gush of water draining off the boards. We didn't stop until we were well up on the grass, both of us soaked to the bone, the team blowing and shivering, and the rain coming harder now like it was disappointed it had missed. I got the team picketed under a stand of cottonwoods and a fire going under a leaning slab of rock, which is harder than it sounds in the rain, and which I'll take credit for. We got out of the worst of the wet. Marin peeled off her sodden shawl and wrapped herself in the dry blanket I kept rolled under the seat, and she sat staring into the little fire with her teeth chattering, and after a while she laughed. It startled me. I hadn't heard her laugh. It wasn't a happy sound exactly. It was the laugh of someone who's just realized they're still alive and finds the fact absurd. "My husband," she said, "would have hated that crossing. He was a careful man, a planner. He'd have sat on the bank and waited for the water and made a chart of the rise and fall." She pulled the blanket tighter. "I used to think that was his great virtue, his care. After he died I started to think it might have been why everyone walked over us. Careful men wait, and the world doesn't wait for anybody." "Some things are worth being careful about," I said. "And some doors only open once." She looked at me across the fire. The control had washed off her in the river, somewhere in that channel, and what was left was just tired and real. "What did you lose, Mr. Brennan? On the road? You've got it written all over you the way you watched that coach this morning. You didn't help me out of charity. You helped me out of a wound." "I'm not a talker. I told you that. I had not said her name to anyone, my wife's name, in 2 years. I'd kept it the way Marin kept the seed corn, sealed up tight so it couldn't spoil. I told her, not all of it, but more than I'd told the preacher, more than I'd told my own brother. About the road, and the wagon I should have driven and didn't because I'd let a buyer talk me into staying behind one more day to dicker over a price, and the fever that took her on the way to her sister's, and the 3 days it took word to reach me, and the grave I dug myself in the rain because I couldn't stand to watch another man's hands do it. I count things now, I said. Debts, favors, I keep a ledger. I think I'd never said this part out loud. I think if I can just keep the accounts balanced, keep track of every little thing owed and owing, then maybe the world's not as random as it felt that week. Maybe it adds up to something. Maybe there's a reason. I poked the fire. It's foolishness. The world doesn't balance. I know it doesn't. I watched it not balance this morning in front of the relay office, but I keep the ledger anyhow. Marin was quiet for a long moment. The rain hissed in the cottonwoods. It's not foolishness, she said finally. It's the same thing as the corn. You're keeping something alive that the world wants dead. For you it's the idea that things ought to be fair. For me it's 8 years of my husband's hands. She looked at the fire. Maybe that's all anybody's doing in the end, carrying some small living thing across the river that the river would just as soon take. I didn't have an answer for that. I still don't all these years on, but I've never forgotten it. We slept a few hours, her under the rock and me by the fire with my hat over my face, and we were moving again before full light with the rain blown out and the world washed and dripping. The shortcut had cost us. The crossing had cost us. By my reckoning, we'd be into Ardmore Wells Thursday night, which left Friday morning to find the office and file tight but possible. That was when we found the homestead with the sick child. It was a sorry little soddy a mile off our track, and I'd have driven past it if Marin hadn't seen the woman in the yard waving both arms over her head, which is country sign language for the love of God, stop. The family was named Heller, husband off freighting, due back nobody knew when. The wife alone with 3 children, and the youngest, a girl of maybe 4, burning up with fever and a cough that rattled in her chest like dice in a cup. The mother had been up 3 nights. She was out of her mind with fear and exhaustion, and she'd flagged us down on the pure animal hope that strangers might know something she didn't. We didn't know much, but Marin knew some. Her husband, it turned out, had been the careful kind of man who learned a little doctoring because the nearest real doctor was 40 miles off, and she'd learned it alongside him. She was in that soddy within a minute, and she had the child's fever read and the cough diagnosed croup, settling toward something worse, and she knew what was wanted. What was wanted was a particular thing. A poultice and a steeped tea, and the makings of both were in Marin's tin trunk, in a little oilcloth packet her husband had put up, dried mullein, a twist of camphor, a paper of some bitter bark I didn't recognize. Medicine. The only medicine for 100 miles near enough. And here is the morally heavy thing, the thing I promised you at the start I wouldn't shy from. If Marin gave that medicine to the Heller child, she gave away the only such packet she had. There'd be no replacing it before Ardmore Wells. And more than that, staying to nurse the child through the crisis meant staying. Hours, maybe through the night. Hours we did not have. Hours that ate straight into the margin between us and Friday's closed door. She knew it. I watched her know it. I watched her kneel by that fevered child with the oilcloth packet in her hand and do the arithmetic one more time. And this time the arithmetic was the cruelest it had been yet, because this time the cost wasn't her own comfort or her own safety. This time the cost was the land, her husband's land, the corn, the whole reason she'd been put off a coach and crossed a flood and bared her grief to a stranger by a fire. A sick child she'd never met, against everything she had left in the world. I want you to understand that I would not have blamed her. I'll say it plain. If Marin Tate had closed her hand around that packet and said, "I'm sorry, I can't, I have a clock to beat and a dead man's land to save," I would have understood it to the bottom of my soul, and I'd have driven her out of that yard and never thought 1 inch less of her. I know the hour because I was outside by the wagon, where I'd spent the night doing the only useful thing I could think of, which was nothing. Minding the team, feeding the fire the family kept in the yard, and watching the door of the soddy for the shape of Marin coming out to tell me whether the child had lived or died. When she finally came out, she was gray with tiredness and her sleeves were soaked and there was a looseness in her shoulders I'd never seen on her, and for one terrible second I thought it was grief. Then she said, "Her fever broke. She's sleeping. Real sleep, not the bad kind." And she sat down hard on the wagon tongue like her strings had been cut, and she put her face in her wet hands and she cried. It was the first time. She'd lost a coach and a husband and damn near a wagon in a flood, and she hadn't cried for any of it. She cried for a stranger's child who lived. I didn't say anything. I'm not a talker. I just sat down on the tongue beside her, and after a while she leaned over until her head rested against my shoulder, and we sat there in the dark and the cold while a child we'd never see again slept off a fever inside. And I want to tell you that in 2 years of keeping a ledger to make the world add up, that was the first thing that ever truly balanced. But the clock had not stopped for any of it. We left at the first hint of gray, the Heller woman pressing on us a sack of cornbread and a side of bacon she could ill afford, and the team pulled out fresh enough, but the truth sat between us on the seat like a third passenger. We had lost the night. The whole night. We would not make Ardmore Wells by Thursday dark. We'd make it Friday, and Friday the office closed at noon, and we'd be lucky past lucky to roll into a strange town, find the land office, and file a sworn affidavit with witnesses before a clock we couldn't see ran out. I pushed the team hard, harder than was kind. Marin didn't speak much. She'd gone back behind the ice, and I understood why she was bracing. She had given away the medicine knowing it might cost her the land, and now the bill was coming due, and a person can only do that grand a thing once before they have to spend a while just enduring the price of it. We came down into Ardmore Wells at 20 minutes to noon on Friday. I have never driven a wagon down a town street like I drove down that one. Folks scattered. A dog gave chase and gave up. Marin had the trunk braced and her jaw set and her eyes hunting the buildings for the right sign, and it was she who spotted it, United States Land Office, on a square frame building at the end of the street. And it was she who was off the wagon before I'd fully stopped, trunk in her arms, taking the steps 2 at a time. I tied off fast and came after her, and that's when I saw the saddle horses at the rail. One of them was a tall blood bay with a saddle worth more than my wagon, and tooled into the skirt of that saddle were the initials HV. Harlan Voss had made the stage Thursday night. He was already inside. I came through the door into a low room that smelled of ink and pipe smoke and floor wax, with a long counter, a registrar behind it, a spare, dry old man with spectacles pushed up on his forehead, and Harlan Voss leaning on the counter in his broadcloth coat, mid-sentence, a sheaf of papers under his soft hand. "And as the lapse will be effective at noon today," Voss was saying, smooth as butter on a warm knife, "I'm prepared to file on the quarter section the moment it reverts. I've the survey and the fee right here. Now, I understand there's some sentiment about the widow, but the law is the law, and she has not, as you can plainly see, appeared to." "I'm here," Marin said. Voss turned. "I'll give the man this much." His face didn't fall, it just closed the way a hand closes. "Mrs. Tate," he said, "you look unwell. The road must have been hard. A pity you couldn't make the stage." "You made sure I couldn't," Marin said, and set her trunk on the floor and stepped up to the counter beside him as if he weren't there. "Sir, I'm Marin Tate, widow of Josiah Tate, and I've come to file the final proof on homestead claim. She had the number by heart and prove up my husband's land. I have the date. I have the affidavit. I'm before noon." The registrar looked at the clock. It said 11 minutes till. He looked at Marin, wet, gray, swaying on her feet, and at Voss, soft and dry and certain. "The final proof," the registrar said, not unkindly but with the immovable patience of a man who has watched 1,000 desperate people fail at the exact thing they were desperate about, "requires the affidavit of the claimant, which you have, and the corroborating testimony of 2 credible witnesses who can swear to the residence and improvements upon the claim. That's the law, ma'am. Without 2 witnesses to the proving up, I can't accept the filing, and at noon the claim lapses." He glanced at Voss's papers and away again, and I saw that he didn't like it, and I saw that he'd do it anyway because the law was the law. Have you brought your witnesses? And there it was, the last door. Marin's neighbors had been too frightened of Voss to sign. She told me as much by the river. The two men who could have sworn to Josiah Tate's plowing and fencing, and the soddy he'd raised with his own hands, were 60 miles north and would not come, and there was no one in this room who'd ever set foot on the Tate claim except Marin herself. I watched the arithmetic finish, finally, after 4 days, and come out exactly as bad as it had threatened to come out since the moment that coach door clicked shut. She had crossed a flood and given away her medicine, and sat up all night with a stranger's dying child, and she was going to lose the land at the last counter for want of 2 men's signatures. Voss knew it. He took out a gold watch and looked at it just to be cruel. I did not have a plan. I want to be clear about that. I'm not the kind of man who has plans. I'm the kind who counts. But I had walked into that room with a ledger in my pocket, and standing there watching the world refuse one more time to balance, I felt the whole 2 years of accounts come due at once, and I opened my mouth without knowing what was going to come out of it. What came out was, I'm a witness. Every head turned, Marin's most of all. Tom. I've been on the Tate claim, I said to the registrar, holding his eye, because a man can hold an eye while he lies if he's got enough truth underneath the lie to stand on. I've seen the soddy Josiah Tate built, and the fence he ran and the breaking he did with his own team. I'll swear to it. It was a lie. I'd never seen the place. And the registrar, God bless his dry, careful soul, looked at me over his spectacles and knew it, or near enough. And your name, sir, and your relation to the claim. Tom Brennan, I run cattle north of. The door opened behind us. I want you to remember the start of all this. I told you a story about a man who learned that getting involved in other folks' troubles is the surest way to inherit them. And I told you I keep a ledger because I want the world to balance, and it never does. The man who came through that door was named Abel Heller. He'd come into Ardmore Wells off the freight road at dawn, found his rig's note paid, and a message waiting that his daughter had near died of the croup 3 nights back and been saved, by a passing woman with medicine and a steady hand. A woman bound for the Ardmore Wells land office. A woman his wife had described down to the brown-turned dress and the tin trunk. And Abel Heller had spent the morning walking that town looking for the chance to thank her, and he'd seen my wagon tied wrong in front of the land office and put it together, and he'd come in. He didn't know one thing about the Tate claim. He'd never been within 60 miles of it. He couldn't have sworn to a fence post. But he'd heard the registrar's last words through the door, and Abel Heller was a big, slow, careful man who had just been handed his daughter's life back by the woman standing at that counter, and he looked at Voss in his broadcloth coat. And he looked at Marin swaying on her feet, and he made an arithmetic of his own. I'll be her second witness, Abel Heller said. You've seen the improvements on the claim? The registrar asked. Abel Heller looked that dry old man dead in the eye. I've seen what that woman builds, he said, and what she keeps alive, and what she gives away to save a thing that's dying. I'll swear to her proving up anything she set her hand to in front of God and you both, and if that's not the kind of witness the law wants, then the law's a poorer thing than I took it for. It was not strictly the testimony the statute called for. But the registrar was a man too, under the spectacles and the patience, and he had watched the whole shape of it walk through his door, the rich man with his watch and his head start, the wet widow with her tin trunk, the cattleman who'd lied for her and the freighter who'd come to thank her, and I believe he made an arithmetic that morning that wasn't in any statute book. He looked at the clock. 6 minutes to noon. Raise your right hands, he said. Voss put his watch away. He gathered his survey and his fee with hands that were, I was pleased to see, no longer quite so soft and certain, and he said something about a protest and an appeal that nobody in the room troubled to answer, and he went out, and the blood bay with the tooled saddle carried him north out of this story for good. Marin signed. Her hand shook so badly she had to do her own name twice. The registrar pressed his seal into the page and the claim was hers, proved up, final, the quarter section of grass and the soddy and the broken ground and the dead man under it, all of it, hers and no one's to take. She didn't cry this time. She'd spent that by the hell or fire. She just stood with both hands flat on the counter and her head down, the way you stand when a weight comes off you so sudden you have to relearn how to hold yourself up without it. Outside, in the noon light, Abel Heller pumped my hand and pumped Marin's and would not stop thanking her, and she would not stop thanking him, and the two of them stood in the street thanking each other in a circle until I thought we'd be there till dark. Kindness, paid back from the strangest direction a person can be saved from. I'd given up a horse sale and a night's sleep, and told a flat-out lie to a federal officer, and none of it had been the thing that saved her. The thing that saved her was a packet of medicine she'd given away 3 nights before, to a child she'd never see again, on the worst possible night to give anything away at all. The world doesn't balance, I told you that, I still believe it. But every so often, not on schedule, never when you're counting on it, it adds up anyway, from columns you didn't know you'd been keeping. We drove out to her land that afternoon. It was 60 miles, but neither of us suggested waiting. The soddy was just as Voss's neighbors had been too scared to swear to. A low brown house, a careful man had built with his hands, a fence run straight, a half section of breaking gone back to weeds because a widow can't plow what the law won't let her keep. We walked it in the long gold light. Marin went to a particular corner of the yard, near the cottonwood, where the grass grew a little different over a long, low mound, and she knelt there a while, and I left her to it. When she came back, she had the tin trunk open and the oilcloth empty, but the other thing, the bigger thing, was still there. The seed corn. 8 years of a dead man's hands, sweet and drought-hard and early, the only sack of it in the territory, carried across a flood and a fever, and a last closed door by a woman the world had tried 4 days running to be rid of. She put a few kernels in my hand. Plant something, she said. I've a lot of ground and only 2 hands. I'm still here. That's the part I'll let you work out for yourself, the years between that afternoon and this telling, the ground we broke, the rest of it. I'm not a talker. You've gathered that by now. I'll only say I gave up the ledger eventually, stopped counting, found I didn't need to once I had a thing in front of me that grew back fairer than I could have ever balanced it. There's a sound a door makes when it shuts on a person who needed to be inside it. I heard it once, on a Tuesday, and I've spent the rest of my life on the other side of a different door entirely, the one that opened after.